My name is Bill Totten. I worked at the college from 1967 until 1992. And I was employed in the registrar's office as the registrar. And we're here to talk a little bit about the history of the college.
Hi, my name is Pat Hallahan. I started at the college in 1970. I was here till 2000. Initially taught English in the School of Adult Retraining, and then did a variety of different kinds of counseling jobs, and eventually was a traditional post-secondary counselor at the college. As Bill mentioned, our purpose here today is to, in honor of the college system's 50th anniversary, try to capture some of the history of the college on video. And we're going to start today with one of the pioneers of St. Clair College, Bill Totten, who started here in 1967 when St. Clair was formed. And he's going to walk us through the development of the college. But I wanted to ask you first, Bill, how and especially why did you choose to come to St. Clair College?
Well, in early 1960s through to 1967, I was very happily teaching mathematics at Vincent Massey Secondary School here in Windsor. And a colleague of mine in the secondary school system by the name of Roy Giroux let me know that he had accepted a position at the college and that there would be a position of associate registrar being advertised in the very near future. I, like many people, including most educators, had no idea what a College of Applied Arts and Technology was. So I did some research and ended up applying for the job, and needless to say, I got the position and haven't had a day of regret since.
As I understand it, there wasn't a whole lot of direction given to the colleges with respect to how to start this new educational animal. But there was a document called the Basic Documents, which I understand you actually brought with you.
Yeah, I have a copy here. In October of 1965, Bill Davis, who was then the Minister of Education, with one stroke of the pen created 19 community colleges. And the provincial legislature produced a document. It's called the Basic Documents, and very simply put, it was basic. All it outlined was the location of the colleges, how a board of governors was to be incorporated, and a few of the niceties of the provincial government that were in the system. Now, they started off with 17 colleges, which grew immediately to 19 colleges through the splitting up of two of the northern colleges. And that 19 colleges has now grown to the 26 colleges that we've got today in 2017. The Basic Documents contained no regulations, no traditions, no past practices, policies, procedures. We were completely on our own. So as new employees, we had to exhibit an awful lot of creativity, and it created problems, but it was still an awful lot of fun. It was a great time to be here.
What are some practical examples of some of the issues you had to face and how you actually got started?
Well, let me give you an example of my first day at the college. I arrived, Roy Giroux showed me my new office, and he said, well, I guess we have to get you some furniture. So we jumped in the car and we drove down to the local office supply place, downtown Windsor, and we walked in and announced that we were from St. Clair College. And a salesman immediately jumped on us, and we walked through the place, and I said, oh, I like that desk, that looks nice, and that chair, and how about that credenza, and oh, a file cabinet, and a coat rack, and a couple of ashtrays. Next day, the furniture all arrived, somebody paid the bill, and we moved on to other things. It was the same with staff. In those days, we had no computers. Everything was done by hand. And when we had something major like report cards or letters of admission, we would call in young ladies from a local hiring agency, and we'd get the job done, and I'd go to Roy after and I'd say, you know, this young lady is really a capable person. tell her to report Monday. And somebody would start paying her salary. And that was the way things developed in those days. Policies and procedures were non-existent. Something would happen. Eventually it'd get written down, but it was so urgent to get things happening that you just did them and wrote about them later. The same went with curriculum. The same went with all college policies and procedures. It was fun.
I think, though, unlike some of the other colleges, St. Clair was fortunate to have a predecessor institution in the form of WOIT, the Western Ontario Institute of Technology.
Yeah, we were fortunate. There were 5 or 6 institutes across the province, in Windsor and Hamilton, Toronto, Ottawa, North Bay, and those colleges had the advantage of having a bit of a structure absorbed into them, and that's what we used as a basis. Now, WOIT, which was ours, Western Ontario Institute of Technology, existed in downtown Windsor since the mid-50s. And they were in a facility on Mercer Street that was between Mercer and McDougall at the corner of Elliott, in a former elementary school which had been condemned in 1930s. And that was where WOIT existed, and they had a bunch of portables around it, and that became our basis for where we carried out most of our initial activity was in those facilities. But WOIT did provide a running start for St. Clair College.
If I remember correctly, though, I think you mentioned at one point traveling across the river to get some sense of admissions procedures and grading and things like that.
We were very fortunate in that respect because several of us, thanks to the policy at the college of that time paying our tuition, several of us were attending post-degree programs, master's programs basically, at Wayne State University. And we got to know a lot of colleagues in the community colleges in Michigan. So having to know those people, we were able to go over there and visit them, and we always came back with boxes full of stuff that we have been able to pick up in terms of publications and forms and policies that we were able to adapt and put into practice, and that gave us a big jump in the rest of the province.
I can see that. As I understand it, a student, for example, that was in year 1 at WOIT in a 3-year program was transitioning then into St. Clair College. So you would have seen a number of the WOIT students become St. Clair College students. I'm just curious, 50 years later, how would you describe the difference between what the student body looked like then versus now?
Probably a lot easier for you and I to accept as we went through a transition than it would be for people today to accept what the differences are. When we started off, WOIT when WOIT started off, they started off with 3 programs, electrical, mechanical, and electronic technology. That grew to 5 by the addition of a secretarial arts program and a business program, business administration. So what happened? They all required grade 13 admission in those days, which of course doesn't exist today. They were all 3 years in length, which was similar to a lot of the university programs that were existing in those days, and attracted a lot of the same students. Between 1967 and 1973, the fast period of growth in the college system, the number of programs increased from that initial 5 to 37. So you can imagine, the growth that went on during that period of time. In that 37 programs, there were programs of 1 year, 2 year, and 3 year duration. And what happened was the college was fulfilling its mandate to provide opportunities to non-university bound students. And this opened the door for a lot of students, and it opened the door in particular opportunities for young ladies. There were very, very few young ladies in the White programs, very few in the initial St. Clair programs, but there were a lot of new programs that were created that provided those opportunities for those students. So it was an interesting period of growth in terms of program development.
Part of the function of the registrar's office, I think, to this day is what we call high school liaison.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious as to how you went about educating the community about the fact that this new educational animal existed, what it did, and then how did you go about trying to attract students here?
Well, I guess in those early days, everybody recognized that our biggest single task was to create an awareness within the community of Essex and Kent County, Windsor and Chatham, of what a college was and what opportunities it provided for students. And it was difficult because in those days, guidance counselors, all university graduates that had gone into the high school system, and obviously would think that if a good student came along, then that student should go to a university because I went to a university. That is, the natural feeling. And we had a big obstacle to overcome in the form of the attitude of the counselors within the high school system. So what we did was, first off, we hired a retired counseling head from a high school to head up our liaison program. He knew all the counselors. He was able to, relate to all the counselors in the high school system, and we had an in to the counseling office, which gave us an in to talking to students. That was one big thing we did. Another thing that we did was when the summer months came around, we would hire high school counselors to come in and do admissions counseling, which had a twofold purpose. First of all, they learned what was required in admissions, and secondly, they became thoroughly familiar with the programs at St. Clair College, which they carried back to their schools and their counseling in the high school system later. So those were two of the big things that we did to try to create an awareness in the system.
Just curious, some of the programs you mentioned that were the initial programs at White exist still today: mechanical engineering, technology, electrical, electronics, chemical. Any sense of how the curriculum from 1967 for that program would be different from the curriculum for the same program today?
The curriculum was totally different back in those days. Here's an example of the chemical technology program. And in the technology programs, the first year was common to all. The second and third years are shown here with the chemical program. You'll note that the students attended class 30 hours per week in this chemical program, and that was typical of all of the programs in those early years. In fact, some of the technology programs ended up going as high as 34 and 36 hours per week. And this wasn't just the students. This was also the staff. The staff taught 36 hours a week in those days. The curriculum, the outline of the curriculum was very rigid. It was very typical of a high school system whereby you were given a list of courses that you would have to take over the course of your year. They were 1 year at a time. And the failure of a course within that program meant you repeated the entire year, just as was the case in the high school system. So it was very different in 1967 from when it is today.
Obviously, one of the challenges of the college system was to attract and hire teachers. We know where you came from. What is your sense of where a lot of the other teachers came from?
Well, first of all, an awful lot were absorbed from White. And the staff was not big. I mean, we did not have a large staff at all in those days. But they came from White. Some came from industry, because a lot of the programs in those 37 programs were very industrially oriented. So a lot of them came right out of industry with no degrees at all. And also we did have some degree holding people who were hired to teach. But I think the staff in those days could be characterized by saying that it was small, it was very collegial. We worked together every day, we had lunch together, we partied together, and we knew each other. And it was a very, very collegial atmosphere, which was, again, completely different from what I understand it is today.
Yeah, I read somewhere once that John Diefenbaker, back sometime in the late 50s, canceled the Avro program, and I understand a number of the staff there actually went on to NASA in the U.S. and helped with the space program. But as I understand that a number of those people went to the colleges.
A number of them came here, that's right. I think Justin McNamara was one faculty member who was at Avro. Mike Gredis, I think, came from Avro. And I think there were several others. Yeah. And they came to St. Clair, and good examples of people coming right out of industry and right into the classroom and bringing that experience and knowledge with them.
Right.
Yeah.
What would you say are some of the notable changes that occurred as White transitioned into St. Clair College?
I guess you know, we could see some examples of that. The one thing was that all students came from grade 13. The students were all required to wear blazers and ties to class, labs, lectures, whatever. That was a tradition at White, and it was carried for a very short time into St. Clair. Keep in mind that this transition took place during the 1960s, late 60s and early 70s, and this was a time of significant change throughout post-secondary education. It was the time of the Vietnam War, it was the time of demonstration and rebellion, and when St. Clair started, there was no way that the students were going to wear blazers and ties. And so as a result, that was one of the traditions, much to the chagrin of a lot of the White students. It was one of the traditions that went by the board. There were, again, the student body, as I said earlier, were primarily male. That changed completely with the addition of these programs that you know, attracted a lot of female students, and the whole student body changed in that respect. You know, simple things like the grading system. They came out of high school with the percentage system. They came into St. Clair, and one of the things was that we wanted to go to the grade point system because the grade point system was known by post-secondary educations for transfer purposes. We went through about 5 iterations of a grading system before we finally got one that was accepted and has carried through. But the acceptance by other post-secondary educations, primarily universities, of an understandable grading system was crucial. So that was another major change that we went through.
Back in 1967, when St. Clair College was actually founded, there was no South Campus. So I was just curious as to your understanding of the facilities that existed at that time as compared to what we have here now.
Well, okay, keep in mind again that Bill Davis created 19 colleges all at once. And that meant 19 campuses. And if you look around the system today, the provincial government bought property on the outskirts of the urban areas in almost every community across the province where there was to be a college. And we were no different. There was 100 acres purchased in what was farmland in those days, in the 66 and 67. And we were a piece of farmland growing corn and wheat south of Cabana Road. And the first building on that site was the creation of a windy road that went into the campus and a T-shaped frame temporary building. And that temporary building housed the new president. It housed a small library, and I think it was one of the business programs that was out there, and a small parking lot. And that was what was called Green Acres. And our administrative offices were at 660 Olette, which was right downtown up over Sir George's Steakhouse. The first secretarial arts program was over a theater on Olette Avenue. The technology programs remained at Mercer Street, but they used the Burroughs building, and which was a office supply factory right next door to Mercer Street. So we were all over, and this is a view of a map that shows you the locations that existed just in Essex County. So yeah, we were all over before we finally got a campus. Yep.
From 1967 to 1972, St. Clair College grew very rapidly. Can you give us a sense of the demographic, the numbers, the student numbers, the program numbers, et cetera?
Well, when Voigt started, there were around 100 students, and that carried on pretty well through the period of the 3 technology programs. By the time St. Clair absorbed Voigt, I think the number was close to 400 that came in. In the period from 1968 through until 1973, the number grew from the original 390 or 400 to the area of 1,200 students, which was a rapid growth, you know, when you start thinking about systems that you need to cope with that, and cafeterias and all that sort of thing. So it was rapid. It was exciting, but it was rapid, and it was going on across the province. So it was an exciting time.
When I retired, there were approximately 6,000 full-time students, and today they're pushing 10,000 students.
That's right.
So I think
hard to believe.
You have to think the college system was a great success.
And another 25 or so thousand students at night.
Right.
So we're impacting the community.
There are probably any number of reasons which account for the college's rapid and sustained growth. But in the early years, I'm wondering if there was one person in particular that you would say had a lot to do with that.
Yeah, there were several contributing factors, obviously. One was the thirst for some opportunities that didn't exist for high school graduates. But one of the real prime movers of St. Clair College was Dr. R.C. Quittenden, who was the college's first president. And people looked at him and they said, oh man, he's an eccentric of some kind. But he was eccentric like a fox. He knew what he was doing. He realized that the college was totally unknown within the community that we were serving of Essex and Kent County. And he did all kinds of things to, to try to enhance the awareness in the community that made the college grow. And he was the prime mover. Let me just wrap up by saying that in addition to teaching math at Massey when I was there, I did a lot of student counseling. And in those days, counseling was primarily vocational counseling and educational counseling, very little personal counseling. And in that role, I had the opportunity to talk to a lot of students who were moving through a high school system with no goal in mind. And these were people who had no direction, desire, capacity, financial means to attend a university. And the growth of the college system provided those students with some hope. And it really did open opportunity for thousands of students, and that's demonstrated by the number of students that are taking advantage of college programs today. So it's just an important point to make that this college system created possibilities for that 80% of students who did not go to university. In those days, the figure was 20% university, and the remainder went on to technical colleges like White, Ford Trade School, things like that, or went directly into the workforce. St. Clair provided the opportunity, and it's now proving itself that that's exactly what it's doing.
In its 50 years, the college has now graduated over 100,000 students. So,
yep, that's right.
Terrific success story.